Rogue Refinery episode 3. This is the modern portion of it, and just a reminder, if you haven't seen the Pioneer and the Standard, go and check the links in the description down below. Go and watch them, see what the other two guys from Faithless Brewing podcast got up to. But now it is all about Damon and Modern. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing great. How are you, Ali?
Good. Thank you very much. So, tell us, how did Vadrok do for you? Vadrok, however the heck you say his name. How did he do for you in Modern?
Yeah, so my first instinct was, well, Vadrok is Jeskai colors. Dan was saying, oh, you can play it without blue. And I was like, I mean, I guess. Just on the mutate, because the mutate actually lets you play it as a two-color card. But I decided to build some sort of Jeskai tempo deck and not go for crazy combos with Polywog symbiotes or anything like that. And
crazy.
I played a couple warm-up games to try some cards out, and what really worked well for me was building a slippery, slimy Bogle Octo Vadrok mutant, where the Bogle gives everything hexproof, so your opponent can't really mess with it. The Octopus actually is just really good on a Bogle on turn 2. Turn 1 Bogle, turn 2 Octopus. Puts you in a pretty good spot a lot of matchups. And then this is a very safe home for Vadrok, and Vadrok really needs more mutations to happen to really kind of go up in value. Just having 4 Vadroks isn't really enough to make the card worth it. So quickly, you just nailed this starting point of 4 Bogles, 4 Octopus, 4 Vadrok, and then filled in some Jeskai cards like Bolts, Helixes, getting into the Trials, started adding some Teferi Time Ravelers.
All right, so Damon, we've already seen a hexproof version of this deck not have the most success. How did you fare with this version of the deck? Yeah,
well, do you want the good news, the Instagram version, or the the Snapchat version?
You know what? Let's start with the good news. The last show was pretty negative, so let's go positive this time.
All right, so right on my Instagram feed, I have this nice, slightly photoshopped photo of a 4-1 result.
Got the right filters on.
Exactly. Managed to beat a lot of red-white Luris and Grishelbrand, and I lost one round to red-white Luris also. The deck felt pretty good in those matches. I had a lot of good lines with Gideon of the Trials. Managed to play on double Gorklan Rampager one round with Gideon providing this split target. Had a lot of good Bolt, recast Bolt. I think I cast the same Ether Gust 4 times one match, one game. Things went well. The one loss, during my second round, I played against red-white Luris, and I beat them 2-0. And I'm like, my draws were pretty good, but, I'm surprised this is that good of a match, but sounds good, let's go. And the next one I got completely stomped by it. And so I had this little bit of a doubt in my mind that this deck was actually that well positioned. And so after the 4-1 results, are you ready for the bad news?
Yeah, I was about to say, what's the bad news? This sounds pretty
how
good
bad
so
is
far.
it?
Not bad, right?
It was so bad I got tilted and kind of stopped keeping track.
Oh no. All right, so let's just forget about all those things that happened after the 4-1 and just kind of focus on that initial list that you had a really, really good start with. And the first card that I wanted to kind of ask you about was Dreadhorde Arcanist. Now, this was a card that was tossed around by David. He gave it a shot. Dan probably also took a look at it as well. But you decided to actually submit a deck and play 3 copies of this card. How did this card perform for you in this deck?
Yeah, it was pretty high variance. It has some nice upside. First off, it has a similar role. You want to have some spells that Vadrok can target. So you may already be playing cards like Serum Visions. And then secondly, Vadrok actually can upgrade its power from mutating onto it. And so you can start casting your bigger targets that Vadrok might want to have lying in your graveyard. I wound up being a little bit less high on it towards the end, simply because, first off, there's a lot of bolts and pushes in the format, so the Arcanist just tended to have a very, very short life expectancy. Second off, it consumes fuel that Vadrok wants to have. Arcanist is a one-shot thing. That card is gone once you use it. And then lastly, this is the biggest thing, is that Vadrok wants to have 3 CMC plays to recast, and Arcanist naturally wants 1s. And cards like Serum Visions are really hard in this deck because, as my colleagues pointed out, the mana is really, really tough. And so I learned at some point, by far the best 1-drop this deck has is either Bogle into Octopus, and barring that, fetch Rugrin Triome. Just that's it. Don't do anything else. Don't do anything fancy. Don't try to maneuver your mana base in any other way. Get the Triome out. If you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I think we've seen time and time again how the mana is a big issue for this, especially just because of kind of the prohibitive cost of being able actually trying to mutate, which is basically red white, red blue. Just getting that double red seems really tough. And we're talking about Modern. I mean, there were mana issues in Pioneer, so that's got to be a big takeaway here too, right? Just being able to cast your spells, I mean, this seems like a really, really tough challenge to pull off.
There are decks where you can actually shock yourself down to, 1 life as far as it really is concerned. Up against like combo or miracles or whatever, but then against a lot of these burn decks, you can really afford to shock yourself about 0 times, and so then the red cost is tough.
Yeah, not even red. You've also got white in there for Gideon of the Trials. Like, what does he add to the deck?
So the dream with Gideon is that first off, he's a good 3 CMC play, so if he gets countered or killed, you can get him back with Vadrok. Meanwhile, Gideon gives you some game against certain combo decks. So, for example, Ad Nauseam or Grishelbrand actually has a lot of trouble with a Gideon with the emblem. I wound up cooling off on Gideon a little bit. He did a really good work in the league. But yeah, the white first off is just really hard to fetch around, to plan towards that. And then secondly, the first Gideon is fine, but sometimes you just draw like multiple Gideons and you're like, these actually don't really work well in multiples. And you have a Gideon on the board and your best target in your graveyard is also another Gideon, and you're like, well, I guess I can Vadrok back the other Gideon as like a one-shot fog on a second creature, and it's really not good.
That's fair. And also keep in mind, for those of you who are going to maybe take a look at this deck and give it for a spin, cannot mutate onto Gideon of the Trials. Just remember that, folks. Gideon is a human. But, I think one of the big reasons why Gideon is in this deck is talking about, I think, the most fun card I'm going to go with that you have in your deck, the most interesting card for sure. And that's Chance for Glory.
Oh, yeah.
Chance for Glory plus Gideon. That is something that I want to be doing. Talk to us about Chance for Glory in this deck.
I can't just give you guys a good, straight, clean Jeskai tempo deck, can I?
No.
There's to be something weird happening. So I was inspired by some of these Jeskai Can't Lose decks from a year and a half ago that some streamers were playing. It was a super sweet deck where you go Madcap Experiment into Platinum Angel, you cast Pact of Negations, and Chance for Glories take a million turns. And so with this, I was like, well, I want these Gideons anyway, and then I have the ability to recast 3 CMC cards. So for example, one card I could just Vadrok onto Dreadhorde Arcanist, recast Chance for Glory, attack, the Arcanist has 3 power, recast Chance for Glory. Now you have, several turns queued up, and the Gideon emblem means you don't have to worry about losing at any of them. And it seemed like it was like a moth towards a flame. I was drawn towards that.
That does sound like fun. I have to ask, how many times did you get that right? Please tell me.
How many times I cast it, I can tell you, and that's 2.
Okay.
Once my Grishelbrand opponent passes the turn with the Grishelbrand out after fizzling, and I was like, well, they're going to attack and draw 7 more. So I obviously have to Chance for Glory. They were like, within bolt range. I was like, well, I have about, 9 outs, and I missed. And then similar situation, I was up against green-red aggro, and they had just 4 creatures on the board, and I was at 2 life.
Oof.
And I was like, well, I actually have like an Arcanist out. I have a Slippery Bogle out. I have a bunch of lands in play. Like, I'm about ready to do this. If I maybe get the right sequence of like a Gideon into a Vadrok or something. So I Chance for Glory. I have a Vadrok. I play the Vadrok, and then my cast a Manamorphose, and I draw another Chance for Glory, which I guess is just how these things go. So I had no successful Glory shots, but I had a couple chances that failed.
That's
a couple of chances for Glory, but both of them did not quite get you there,
No.
which is kind of unfortunate. Now, you did have a good record at the start. So, I mean, were there some highlight moments when you were kind of playing this deck where you were like, wow, I'm doing some really powerful things? What were kind of some of those highlights and some of the really powerful interactions that you had?
Yeah, so Dan had a good point that basically Vadrok himself, no matter how you stack the mutates, they just don't get that big. What that means is that you actually have a chance for the game to just keep on mutating. And so you get these screenshots of some off-camera games I had, Octo, Vadrok, Bogle, or whatever, which is a super cool, powerful creature, but it still has 3 power. And some of the footage we did capture, I managed to assemble Octo, Vadrok, Bogle. I had Vadrok for a minute. That gets bolted real fast.
Goodness.
But when you have these the octopodes, whatever that pluralizes, it was pretty sweet because you get Vadrok out, and then Octopus onto Vadrok, you get back Manamorphose, and actually you go even on mana. So you can actually, in theory, cast 4 octopodes in a single shot. Where you just go Octopus Manamorphose, Octopus Manamorphose, Octopus Manamorphose, Octopus Manamorphose, attack, draw 4, and you've also drawn 4 extra cards. You discard a hand size at that point, and deal your opponent 3.
Yeah, Manamorphose seems like a really fun inclusion in this deck because it actually allows you to do multiple things in a turn.
Yeah, it lets you double spell with Vadrok on turn 4 because you flash back your Manamorphose. And then the more Vadroks you start piling on each other, the more valuable it is to unlock the cards in your hand. And so the Manamorphose gives you this kind of 2 cashback. It's kind of like a big Teferi where you get to untap those 2 lands. Casting a Manamorphose lets you draw a card and get 2 more mana, which lets you get the Octopus Chain going, or just find a way to cast the Lightning Heals in your hand you haven't time to cast yet.
So it certainly seems like there's a lot that you can do with this deck, but I've got to ask, how does Vadrok fare or compare to some of the other value cards that we're seeing now? The Lurrus, the Winota, all these other cards that cheat or get a whole bunch of things back into play or into play. How do you think he does against those cards?
Yeah, so you can actually do a pretty clean direct comparison to Lurrus. So for example, suppose you go turn 1 Bogle, and then turn 4 you mutate a Vadrok onto it and recast a Lightning Helix. So you've put 2 cards into the Bogle Vadrok Mutant. You've gotten 1 card and kind of 2 mana out of this, the 2 to cast the Helix plus the Helix itself. And you're up a 3/3 flying first strike hexproof with the Mutate clause. Meanwhile, your opponent, let's say, is just casting Lurrus on turn 3, so they've spent 0 cards and 3 mana, and they recast a Bauble immediately. So they've basically gone up a card, they have a 3/2 lifelink, and then with the Lurrus clause going into next turn. And so somehow their 8th free card generates about as much value, if not more, than your pretty good turn 4 line for this deck. And in theory, you can go over the top because your card, you can build it up with more Vadroks. That's where things go really nuts. If you have 2 Vadroks, you go Octopus, and now you cast a Helix and a Manamorphose. But the Lurrus is just much more dependable. And it's a free 8th card. And Vadrok onto a Bogle is kind of like 2 cards. So it's like your 6th and 7th cards that are not free. This is where I realized that no matter how much I metagame my 1-for-1 removal, even with the Vadrok triggers, it just was really hard to hang with, especially like the red-black or the green-black Lurrus builds. Winota is another really good comparison because Winota plus Grazer, you spent also 5 mana and 2 cards, but then you can cheat up. For example, as we were trying last week, 13 mana worth of Aura Touch Classification. And so this is like a huge return on investment. That's like not even, look at this, piddly little Lightning Helix. Yeah. And meanwhile, Winota also is a little bit, 4 toughness goes a long way.
Now that we've seen all 3 decks in action, like what can we conclude about Vadrok? It's just too slow, it's just too small, it's not as good as being a companion, that sort of thing.
At least when we're talking about Vadrok in the context of Modern, it seems to me that this deck just gets overpowered by basically the best deck in Modern right now, which happens to be Lurrus, right? You just see a lot of Lurrus decks, especially with the innovation of adding black with the hand disruption. They're just more streamlined. And I mean, anytime you're playing a deck that goes against the best deck in the format and it's a dog in that matchup, you're probably just not going to see a lot of results. You saw, at least in Pioneer, this card did not have success because it matched up poorly against some of the cards that people were playing. But in this sense, it's just the best deck is Lurrus. This deck is pretty weak to Lurrus, so this might not be the best choice to play right now.
Yeah. To be fair, I would not say that my Vadrok build was the by far the best 75 card collection you could assemble with it. The Modern card pool is enormous. There's, for example, how do you cast Ancestral Visions off Vadrok? That's where I really want to figure out. Faithless Looting is long gone. It's a little bit harder than it used to be. Things like that. Dan had some interesting ideas involving Polywog Symbiote going infinite with Manamorphose.
He's not going to stop on the Polywogs.
Makes sense, but I'm not going to claim it isn't possible. So certainly there might be something out there. One issue is that there just isn't enough good mutate cards. We need like a Snapcaster, really good mutate card in addition to Octopus at 2. Like a Bogle with mutate would be really what we need here.
Yeah, the problem with that is I don't think we could print that for Standard.
Well, sure. Modern Horizons 2 then.
There you go.
Yeah, hey, you know what? That might be a good suggestion.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Damon. We appreciate your attempts at making Vadrok work in Modern, but I think, Paul, this week, we're going to have to give it to Standard. I think Dan's list just outperformed all the lists we've seen this week.
Yeah, and you know what? It's kind of a refreshing change of pace, right? We've seen a lot of these cards, oftentimes with a bigger card pool, they have a lot more success because you can really find more cards to cater to and build around a specific strategy. But for at least for Vadrok, it looks like this actually just performs the best in a kind of a fair shell a fair deck. And what better place to do that than in standard, right? Where it really is about just trading resources one for one and getting small bits of advantage here and there. So, I mean, it makes sense actually that this ended up having kind of the most success there. And I really liked Dan's approach to this. I'm just going to build a solid Jeskai deck and put Vadrok in it, and it worked out beautifully. I mean, he had a really, really good result with this deck, and a lot of cool like synergies in between as well. With the interactions with the counters, making a 6/6 flyer on turn 4. I mean, there's just so many cool things that you can do. I really want to actually just try out this deck some more because it really, really looked like a cool, fun, innovative approach to standard, where a lot of people are kind of playing the same thing.
Yeah, same. So kudos to Dan. Now I think we're going to bring back all our friends from the Faithless Brewing podcast so they can find out what our card is for next week. All right, Dan, Damon, and David, your card for next week, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is Fiend Artisan. Any thoughts? Are you scared? Are you okay with this?
It's an exciting card. I think David has a bit of a leg up in the sense that this card has been doing quite well in Pioneer so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it looks like a really interesting puzzle because there's so many different ways to build this, because you're going to have a bunch of creatures and a lot of basically, potentially toolbox ways or maybe even combo kills. So I think there's so many things to do with this card that I think, we can see a lot of really, really interesting brews from everybody, with this card.
Dan, what do you think for standard so far? What's your first instinct?
Wow, Fiend Artisan. I mean, you picked a heck of a card. This is a really exciting one. It's so versatile. It could be a green card. It could be a black card. It could be a black-green card. Is it a combat creature? Is it a tutor piece to find my synergy pieces? I'm not sure, but there's so many directions you can go that I'm really excited to see what we can find with this.
Nice. David?
This card is already maybe the third or fourth best card in the Luris Abzan rally. It'd be interesting to see if there's another way to use it where I'm not sort of piggybacking off of the sort of collective technology of the Magic community. I do love toolbox creatures. These guys are always teasing me about various tutor packages and things that are like way too cute. So I'll be spending a lot of time putting lots of one-ofs in a bunch of lists.
Well, one thing you don't have to worry about is cute. Have you seen Fiend Artisan? That is far from cute. You'll be fine. Damon, what are you thinking for modern?
I am excited to go straight into the Dream Den with this card. I have not had a chance to brew with Luris given these CMCs of these cards you guys keep picking. But Fiend Artisan just slots right in
mana
there.
cards? Come on.
We'll probably try a different build also with the tutor package, have like a Primeval Titan or something to find. But
Nice.
to start with Luris.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Be sure to go and check out the standard and pioneer sections of this episode. They'll be down in the description below. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications so you will be back here next week when we brew around Fiend Artisan. See you then.